I think the biggest flip when people join us is that we instill very early on that we don't speak to customers, we speak to guests. And it's really creating this sense of welcome, right? I think what I'm about to say might ruffle some feathers, but it's fine. I always say to my teams, hire for culture first. I really believe that you can teach everything else, all hard skills. You can teach someone to do an Excel formula. Now with ChatGPT, all of that is just unlocked, but you can't teach culture, right? And I think culture begins with being a consumer of that culture, right? I'm not asking everyone to be an expert in punk rock. I'm not asking anyone to be an expert in country music or in high fashion, right? I think it's just, you know, being a part of it, being genuinely interested and understanding that how we can apply that kind of learning into Satisfy.
You have this concept of the incubation model. And I think it's really interesting. You mentioned some of the things that you do, the collaborations, the new lines, they can take 18 months. And even the term incubation, in a world where everybody's kind of pushing for more faster and there is value in just kind of how quickly you can move, you're very intentional, even if it takes a little bit longer for you to do what you do.
I'm Eric Fulweiler, and this is Scratch, bringing you marketing lessons from the leading brands and brains rewriting the rulebook from scratch for the world of today.
Hey everyone, my guest today is Daniel Groh. He is the Chief Brand Officer of Satisfy, which is a brand that we've been trying to get on the podcast for a while. They were number 50 on our Rival 50 list from October, so I was really excited for this conversation. And it starts in a really interesting place. Daniel is the first guest that did not have an answer to what's your favorite challenger brand, almost intentionally. And so we have a conversation right off the bat on why that is that I think you're going to be really interested in. And if you haven't heard of Satisfy, pause this, go look them up, come back. Fascinating brand in the trail running, apparel space. Probably the place to start with what I thought was most interesting is just how they even think about what they're doing. They don't think of themselves as a shoe company or an apparel company with customers. They think about how do they build a Satisfy world with a hospitality mindset for their guests. So they don't even use the term. You can see Daniel, the entire interview, never used the word customer once. He always talks about end guests. There's something to that, even if you are not in the fashion and the luxury space. I also really like how he talks about how they develop new product ideas and marketing campaigns. They talk about it as an incubation model. We talk really throughout the interview about how to understand the cultural relevance around your audience, which obviously, we've done a lot of research on when it comes to challenger brands, microcultures, Rival 50, all that stuff. And he's got some very specific answers and suggestions around not only how do you understand culture, how do you hire a team that understands culture, but also how do you go about developing ideas that are going to be culturally relevant and make your brand more culturally relevant. And he also talks about, as a bit of a curveball question for me, how they approach it when it doesn't work and how they turned a loss into a win. And then lastly, if you visited their site or Satisfy, these are high-end shoes and apparel. And so it was really interesting to hear Daniel's approach to how they think about commanding that high price point and their approach to that, which even gave me some ideas to take away with how we think about pricing at Rival. So I think you're really going to enjoy this. I'll leave you to it. My conversation with Daniel Groh of Satisfy Running. Daniel, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for making the time. How are you? How are things in Paris?
Good. Thanks for having me, Eric. Paris is busy. We just kicked off Paris Fashion Week. So a lot of good energy, a lot of good partners on the ground, a lot of new stuff to check out, but really great way to start the week with you. So thanks again.
Awesome. So you guys have been on the editorial wish list for a while, and it took the Rival 50 and y'all getting on it to get you here. But here we are, really looking forward to the conversation. And I will say, as a bit of a tease for people listening to make sure they continue, this is one of the most interesting prep calls I think I've done. So I'm really looking forward to getting into the chapters of the conversation that we have today. But before we do that, so as you know, and everybody listening knows, the icebreaker question that we ask every guest is to share a challenger brand that they're particularly passionate about. But you told us just before we press record that you've been thinking about this since the prep call that we had a couple of months ago and actually don't have one. And so we were like, all right, well, maybe we do it at the end. Maybe you come up with one. But actually what I thought was more interesting, and I love that you were up for it, is to talk about why you don't have one. So what is it about kind of like your world or the way that you approach your work that means that you don't have another challenger brand that you're passionate about right now?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question because I think what does challenger mean for everyone? Right? I think it's first and
Mm.
foremost, it's quite different. And I think for us at our approach at Satisfy, I don't want to say we're confident in what we're doing, but we're very sure of the world that we're building, kind of the guests that we speak to, that we really just want to focus on who we are as a brand. And rather than, I would say, compare ourselves to what other people in the industry are benchmarking themselves against, I think the easiest way to do something quite different is to not look at anything at all. And I think, there's this temptation in modern marketing to say, okay, X brand has done this or has signed this athlete. We need to exactly the same. We've seen that with the resurgence of trail, right? I think like trail was its own thing. Everyone was really focused on road running. And now we're seeing many more brands focus in on what trail actually is. And, we've been doing this for the past 10 years. And so rather than us, jump into the marathon bandwagon, which was something that was, starting to pick up, last year and will continue into this year, what we said is, hey, ever since we started Satisfy, we've been a trail running brand. So I think, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, this idea of consistency has really just been something that we've been focused on. And the best way to really keep us on our sites is really just to focus on what we're doing. And so there are amazing brands out there, don't get me wrong. I think there's so many different brands that are doing what's right in their spaces. But I think for us, focusing on what we do best, which is building the Satisfy world, has really led us to really look in what we enjoy in our space. And then obviously look at different categories and say, hey, that's really interesting going on in automotive, or that's really interesting going on in luxury jewelry. How can we bring that into our space? But to call out one brand to say it's a challenger brand for us would be really difficult for me to do right now.
Yeah, I love that. And I do think, at the end of the day, all growth comes from delivering on the needs of the customer, in your case, the guest, which we're going to get into. I thought that was a really interesting perspective and something everybody listening can take. And I think that's how we approach it at Rival, like with our own brand and our own business is, we're building a company for CMOs. It's research, that's content, that's strategy, that's executional services, now technology as well. So we just need to spend more time listening to the needs of our customers. At the same time, of course, it's impossible to not be exposed to what's going on in the industry. And so we just get really tactical. We have a competitor Slack channel. And whenever anybody sees something that a consulting firm or an agency or a MarTech company is doing, we'll drop it in there. But it is, I think, kind of similar to you. We're never distracted by it. We're never trying to follow it. It's just more like, oh, that's interesting. But then we get right back to what is it that blue chip CMOs actually need and aren't getting from, the market as it
Exactly.
exists today.
I agree. I mean, like, I'm aware of everything. And I think that's very
Right.
important, right? I think like me and my teams, the mission is to really be aware of what's going on in culture, right? And I use the word culture versus category because I think there's so much that can be brought in from other categories. And that's really how we approach our brand. But it's also knowing that, when should you dive and double click into certain things? But really for us, it's about our teams are aware of what's going on in sneaker culture, all the way down to obviously, trail running in and of itself, but everything in between, music, what concerts are happening in Paris, because all of that really does influence who we are as a brand. And I think that's also really what makes us unique, right? It's understanding that the benchmarking needs to be on culture versus just our category.
I know I'm totally going off script here, but I'd be curious if you're up for it. I think everybody, the research that we did with microcultures, even the Rival 50, a lot of that focuses on relevance. That's what we see challenger brands doing really well. Relevance comes from culture, not just the fashion and the music and the culture of kind of that world. Not necessarily mainstream, but kind of stereotypical culture, let's say. But there's also like culture for a B2B buying audience and culture for a technology product. And it's the things that are relevant to you around the product or service that you're selling. Being able to understand culture and not just understand where it is, but where it's going and kind of be ahead of the curve and be able to be cool, that's not something that's necessarily easy. Does it just come down to kind of like hiring people that get it, or are there other specific things that you and your team do to make sure that you are tapped into culture and you understand what's going on and where it's going?
It is the most misunderstood role within the C-suite.
Absolutely everything about the industry changed.
CMOs are really f***ed.
Out of all the Fortune 1000 businesses, there's only 41 of them that have a CMO on their board.
I think you're going to see more functions that were traditionally in the selling realm moving toward marketing.
In today's world, and especially as we look to the future, the role of the CMO is at a crossroads.
They'll be taken in by cheap parlor tricks.
We need to reinvent and reimagine marketing Totally.
Deliver on your demand gen goal or lose your job.
If you can do that and make your CEO look good at the same time, actually that's a really powerful thing for a CMO.
It's not enough to just push that on the juniors in your department. What does the future of the CMO role actually look like?
I think what I'm about to say might ruffle some feathers, but it's fine. I always say to my teams, hire for culture first. I really believe that you can teach everything else, all hard skills. You can teach someone to do an Excel formula. Now with ChatGPT, all of that is just unlocked, but you can't teach culture, right? And I think culture begins with being a consumer of that culture, right? And I'm not asking everyone to be an expert in punk rock. I'm not asking anyone to be an expert in country music or in high fashion, right? I think it's just, you know, being a part of it, being genuinely interested and understanding that how we can apply that kind of learning into Satisfy. And it's very difficult, right? I think, if we were just hiring anyone with the hard skills, then Satisfy wouldn't be the brand it is today, right? I think it's really about establishing the fact that the baseline of this brand is because it's a collective of people that are genuinely passionate about what subculture or urban culture is today, and how everyone is adding their own little sauce and flavor into how we're building this brand. And I think, you know, I always tell this, right? It's like, oh, Satisfy, like how you staying edge of the curve, blah, 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 and all that stuff. And it's like, we're so open to the fact that Satisfy is like a human being. It's evolving, right? Satisfy from 10 years ago has similarities as to what it is today, but it's not the same brand. Just like how when you were growing up, you might have liked skateboarding, hip hop, but then now you're just listening to hip hop and might have some skate influence, but it's not really picking through. And so I think it's really about understanding that, to build a successful brand, or at least a brand like Satisfy, culture, especially through talent, is the most important thing, because they're the spokespeople, right? They're the people that are translating your vision into, the activations that we do, the content that we do, all the way down to how we speak to our wholesale partners, right? Everything is a ritual, and everything is a ritual that's anchored in who we are as, people of Satisfy.
Yeah, there's really no shortcuts in order to understand culture. You just need to spend time in culture and or hire people that do. And the other thing I'll draw from what you said, because it's a lot of what we see challenger brands do really well, is if the conventional model and mindset for brand is that it is going to be one thing for everybody forever, it's going to be static. What we see challenger brands do really well that you really talked about is they think it's a feature, not a bug, for a brand to evolve over time. So we call it building a brand operating system, right? Doesn't mean that it changes in a crazy way all the time, chaotically. It's usually intentional, but it does update and upgrade with the world around it, the culture around the audience, the needs of the audience, etc. All right. So, sorry, that was a really interesting rabbit hole, but let's bring it back. So can you give people an overview of Satisfy who might not have heard of you before?
Yeah, so Satisfy is a technical apparel brand. We're based in Paris, and what we really focus on right now is in the trail running space. Obviously, we evolve, as we just talked about. And really, what we're trying to do over the next 5 to 10 years is revolutionize the outdoors, right? We want to revolutionize that through product, right? Through storytelling, through our athlete program. And really, our mission is to really flip the category on its head and really change the script and really start writing our own story. And it's all really starting from a place where you look 10 years ago and everything was very cookie cutter in our category. Everything felt the same, the innovation felt the same, and you couldn't really identify. And as what we've built over the last 10 years is really helping to build a space where people can identify and personalize how they react and relate to the sport or to the outdoors in general. And so, we're an option in a sea of options right now. I think you look 10 years ago and in this space of this, I think a lot of people like to call us independent running brands. We're fewer and far between. And now there's an option for every type of aesthetic. And I think it's great that we're able to help push that forward, help evolve the conversation, and just be another great option in this space. And I think that's really what we're trying to continue to do. And understanding that there's not one entry point. I think a lot of brands think that the entry point is through product. How we like to look at that is expanding that. It could be through editorial, it could be through service, it could be through activation, it could be through racing. And that's really that big ecosystem that we're starting to really flesh out at Satisfy.
So I want to start by talking about this concept of the hospitality mindset and model that you have at Satisfy, to the point, and you've mentioned this earlier, you call your customers guests. So let's start there. What does the hospitality mindset model look like? What does it mean to Satisfy? Where did it come from? How do you bring it to life? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think the biggest flip when people join us is that, we instill very early on that we don't speak to customers, we speak to guests. And it's really creating this sense of welcome, right? And I think that really started out from when I first met Brees, our founder, at his coffee shop. And and I've always been interested in hospitality. And what I really wanted to do was introduce this kind of concept where you might have the best restaurant in the world, but if you have one bad night at that restaurant, you can completely change what that experience could be, and you might never want to go back. And that's the same with any brand, right? You might have the best product, but then if you have one bad experience across that life cycle, you might never come back. And so really flipping that relationship with a guest and being at the service for that guest was that starting point, and taking a step back and saying, every system or every moment that we create needs to feel welcoming because of our price point. And so obviously, if you don't know, Satisfy has a premium price point in our space. We are the most expensive, or should I say costly, brand, or one of the most costly brands in our space. And so having a experience that is welcoming, regardless if you're a customer or not, uh, isn't really what we're trying to build. We're really trying to build that space where, regardless of what your relationship with the brand, if you just discovered us, or if you're a lifelong guest, it really feels welcoming. And so having that thought process really unlocks a lot, and it really allows us to build a system that feels more lifelong versus short term.
I know we're going to talk about price a little bit later on, but can you give people a couple like examples of price points just so that they know what we're talking about
Yeah.
here?
So our entry level short is about 150 euros. Sorry for everyone that's listening that's used to dollars, but I'm sure you guys can do that conversion. We have a super premium merino wool program that we do in Japan that nets out at 300 euros. We're about to introduce our first down jacket, which is at 850 euros. And so really it's about bringing in the best material science, the best fabrics, the best touch and feel, but also the best patterns and cuts into a premium product that you feel good in, but also lasts long term. And so really what we're trying to hit across that is, a product that you can explore with, right? And some of these situations, you need a product that you can rely on. We're about to launch also our new 3-layer jacket, which is really designed for kind of alpine exploration. And so it's a 950 euro jacket. Why is that 950 euros? We developed a new 3-layer fabric, which is very high waterproofing, but very lightweight. We have the RICO program. So if you get lost in the mountains, touch wood, you're able to be found by search and rescue. So it's all these amazing technological innovations, bells and whistles. The way we're constructing the fabric is with this heat melting yarn, which is visually beautiful, but technologically a new innovation. And so it's really about building a product that is representative of who we are as a brand, pushing the boundaries, but also is be able to withstand whatever adventure that you have in front of you.
So with this hospitality mindset, you've created what you call kind of the world of Satisfy. What does that look like in terms of the touch points of what you've done, what you're doing? What does the world of Satisfy look like?
Yeah. So obviously at the core is the product, right? It's really the operating system, or really where everything starts. And what we'd like to build is a world where you can use that product, right? And so we have monthly runs, which are called LSD, long slow distance, that we do in about 15 cities around the world, where runners, whether they're wearing Satisfy or not, can show up, run for free, have an amazing hospitality program after. We have some of the best kind of bakeries, restaurants that work with us around this program. We have ESOP as our incense. We have almost, it feels like an influencer kind of activation, but dedicated really to who our end guest is. So that's an amazing pillar that, guests can come in and join us on a monthly basis. Some of our longer kind of moments really center around ultra racing. And so we do a race every year called Cocodona. It's 240 miles, one of the most gnarliest races in the world. You run up into our aid station at mile 100 and almost feels like the Mirage in the desert, right? You can get your gear repaired, you can get a massage by a massage therapist, you can get vegan options. And it's really about putting our place, or ourselves in the place of the guest, and saying, how can we elevate this experience even more? And all of those things that I've just talked about are free of charge, right? It's regardless if you're a Satisfy customer or not, because it's representative of who we are as a brand. And then, how do we pull that further? We have a publication called Possessed, which is about running, but really allows our brand to really tap into some of the other categories that we're passionate about. We talk to skateboarders that have just started running, musicians that are getting into running, or just, anything that we're really passionate about. And so that really allows us that flex muscle to really pull out what Satisfy can be and demonstrate how far we can go. We have a drink called Floda, which we debuted at this race that I just mentioned, Cocodona, which allows our guests to really take part in more of a, I would say, humoristic side. We did a really fun spot around Floda a couple years ago, and we're starting to really cash out what that whole Floda brand can be. And so really allowing our guests to take part in our brand outside of the product, knowing that, once again, it has a costly entry kind of price, but then allowing them to really be fans of who we are at Satisfy without having to purchase product is really the goal of that world building exercise.
I'm noticing a lot of it is analog, experiential to how you
100%.
show up at races and events, the runs that you organize, even the magazine Possessed is a physical magazine.
It's a physical magazine, correct? Yeah.
I'd love for you to elaborate on that, because that is something that we're seeing kind of at a macro level in the industry. As kind of digital and experiences become easier to produce and typically lower quality, there's kind of a premium and increased value put on the quality of human to human and analog experiences. Is that how you think about it, or how do you think about analog and experiential?
I think as a brand, we're obsessed with analog. I think, even in our content, we shoot on film just because it's not a
Sure.
rejection to digital. Obviously, we're a brand that, is really trying to make the most out of digital and really bring Satisfy to its best. But I think the idea around being analog is not creating the sense of exclusivity, but really bringing back almost this idea of access and having to be there. I think now with the internet, with resale websites, everything can be available, right? If you miss out on a drop, you can buy it on a resale site for an exorbitant amount of money, but you can still buy it, right? But nothing can really recreate that feeling of being there. And it was, if we go back to Possessed, we used to have Possessed on the website, but we took it off the website, really just focused on the print issue, because we felt that in order to properly, experience Possessed, you need to have it in your hand, look at how beautiful the imagery is, play the crossword. And so I think it's really about bringing it back to the essence and saying, there are certain parts of our brand that we feel can only fully be experienced physically or by purchasing a physical object, and really standing by that, where, we believe that there's certain things that people can partake. We're exploring live streaming, for example, for some of the activations that we're doing this year, how people can participate digitally. But I think bringing back the love to making the effort to show up somewhere, whether it's, at our runs or at our races, and rewarding that is really what the thinking is behind.
Yeah, it's interesting. What I'm getting from you is something that we see and think about a lot when it comes to challenger brands is it's kind of two things, but it's, I always think the experience of a brand falls to the lowest level that you deliver, right? So even if you have an incredible experience 9 times out of 10, it's kind of like what you said. If you get a bad dish at a restaurant, that's going to be what you remember and why you don't go back. But if there's 9 amazing things that a brand does, but then it shows up in a way that is off brand or not great, then that is the brand in people's minds, as opposed to those 9 out of 10. And so one, the consistency, which is what I want to talk about next, is certainly there. But then also, you mentioned shooting on film. Like, you certainly don't have to, but it's that idea of, if you took the Satisfy logo off of something that you did, could it be Brooks, or could it be Harrier, or could it be whoever you consider one of your competitors, which is something, it's actually a prompt that we use for our own stuff as well. If we took the rival logo off of something, could it be a McKinsey or could it be a WPP? So I just thought that was really interesting and wanted to call it out. Talking about consistency. So it's interesting. I have this question, which I do want to ask you, of kind of how do you stay consistent over time and also in a market that's kind of constantly demanding new things. But it's also interesting talking about consistency juxtaposed against the conversation that we had earlier around like the brand OS and how things need to evolve and they need to change. So what does the term consistency mean to you, and how does that fit into the overall strategy?
Consistency for us is through the lens of concepts. The way we brief our teams is, how do you build a concept that can stand the test of time? And so LSD, many people would think it's a monthly run, but no, it's a concept, right? It's called Long Slow Distance. There's a format behind it. There's a whole merch series behind it. And the way we build consistency is by starting with strong ideas. Possessed, another great example. UTMB Off-Road Supply, which is another great example. And so for us, it's first and foremost starting with a concept, and then making sure that the concept is fully fleshed out and lives year after year. Because the thinking is the concept can evolve, right? The concept can be refined. And just the true basic fact that at these events or at these places, right, there's so many guests that still haven't had the chance to experience these concepts. And we believe that, in essence, they're still very strong. So why throw them out for the sake of creating something new and air quotes exciting when that concept is still very fresh? If I took a product, MothTech is, one of our best selling products. It's been in the line since the first day of Satisfy, right? And so, you know, in fashion or in general product development, you could have been like, oh, this is, 10 years old. We should throw it out and create something new and fresh, right? If we did that, then, all of our new guests would have never experienced the beauty that is Moth Tech, right? And every single day when someone discovers Satisfy, they see Moth Tech and it's so new and fresh. And so it's also having that almost kind of humbleness to say, we're a growing brand, we're a challenger brand. There's tens of millions of hundreds of millions of people that still don't know we are. So let's say this idea and make sure that when they see it, it still feels fresh. But then we have a duty as brand builders and people that are evolving brands to make sure that the guests that have been with us for 10 years still see excitement in MothTech. And so, for the first time in the longest time, we're expanding what MothTech can be. We're introducing new silhouettes, new graphic treatments, applying it to different parts of the brand as well. And so I think for us, it's about, believing in the fact that what we're creating is strong enough to live year after year, where I think the temptation for other people is like, oh, that's cool. And throw it and just, do it and it lands a bit flat. And they're like, okay, we need to do better next year. But also understanding the fact that there's so many people that still have yet to experience what we're building. So let's keep it going for them. And I think the last part is to double down this idea of concept, where the hardest part of Satisfy is really making sure that we're revolutionizing the outdoors, as I mentioned, but making sure that still people feel connected to what we're doing. And so it's really about finding that almost sound mixer-esque effect, right? Of finding the perfect mix to make sure that it feels fresh, it feels new, but people can relate to it. Because if it's too far out there, people won't connect. And if it's too flat, people will be like, oh, that feels like what X has done. And so it's really that balancing act that allows us to, get that freshness, but also make it feel that something that people can come back to year after year as well.
So I want to talk about the how of how you go about doing this, whether it's product development or marketing, innovation, and activation. You have this concept of the incubation model. And I think it's really interesting. You mentioned some of the things that you do, the collaborations, the new lines, they can take 18 months. And even the term incubation, in a world where everybody's kind of pushing for more faster and there is value in just kind of how quickly you can move, it sounds like there's almost an intentional, you're very intentional, even if it takes a little bit longer for you to do what you do. So how do you come up with these new ideas and how do you actually bring them to life with this incubation model? Hey, everyone, just another quick interruption. If you're listening to this podcast and you're not already part of our AMP community on WhatsApp, would love for you to get involved. So AMP is a community that we started at the beginning of the business, really, just to kind of bring together some of the interesting people that we were talking to, the marketers that we were coming across, many of whom have been on this show as well. And so now AMP is about 300 senior marketers from around the world, from various categories, different stages, challengers, incumbents. And it's really a place where people can share questions, can share resources, can make new connections, can use folks as sounding boards. And for those that are in it, it is a very vibrant community. It's really taken on a life of its own, which is amazing. So if you're listening to this and you want to get involved, please go to our website, weareRival.com. There you can find the application form or reach out to me or someone at Rival directly. Thanks so much.
Yeah. I think first and foremost, the importance of incubation for us is so that we show up feeling relevant whenever something new and exciting comes out. I think, bigger brands have this almost, I would say, sickness to be like, oh, this is trendy, let's pump it out. And then when people call them out for jumping on the bandwagon, they're quite surprised, right? And I think that's really where incubation comes into play. I think the best way to answer your question is through two examples. First and foremost was, a process that we did when we launched our digital denim. So it's one of our best-selling products. It's basically a technical pair of shorts that have vintage denim printed on them. And so in order for that product to be credible in our universe, there had to be a couple of steps that needed to be done. First and foremost, we decided that we needed to work with a partner that was credible in the jeans space. And so we started our partnership with Levi's, that, came out a couple of years ago, and that allowed us to, build that world and storytelling around denim. And so when that, technical climbing collection came out, which is based on vintage Levi's, that technical running short based on denim felt credible and didn't feel out of left field, right? And if you want to kind of scroll back on kind of that rabbit hole as well, you know, Brees, our founder, started his career in denim too. So there is that full red thread as far back as you want to put it. And I think brands need to understand that those moves need to be thought out because, our guests today are super smart, right? They're researching, especially when they're passionate about brands, and it needs to feel, almost pre-developed or overdeveloped for it to actually come out. Another great example is when we worked with Hoka a couple seasons back, where we wanted to make sure that the Hoka reveal felt like something that our community um, could latch onto, especially as we were coming off of a previous footwear partnership. And so we started styling our models on e-com with Hoka footwear. We started seating our athletes Hoka footwear. And so when that actual product came out, it felt credible to who we are as a brand. I think our biggest challenge is making sure that people don't see us as people that are flopping from, one side of the fence to the other, because that's the temptation, right? A lot of these challenger brands on your list, they're probably getting solicited by bigger brands saying, hey, Skims, I'd love to work with you, right? And so it's easy to say, hey, I'd love to work with XYZ. But then at the end of the day, your guest or your fan is going to be call that out and be like, hey, what's your POV, right? Why are you working with this brand? You never stood for that. And so taking the time to really make sure that the ultimate message that you want to lands properly is by taking the time before and really start seeding those tiny messages across. Even the same with how we're, building our product line. You know what I mean? There's a lot of Western influence right now. We started years back shooting in the American desert, right? And, not having as much Western influence, but slowly and slowly just integrating it a little bit more. And you'll start to see a lot of that kind of come to fruition this spring season, where we're integrating the most, I would say, Western inspired details, perforation that takes shape from, Western embroidery. But that's, almost four to five seasons of work, right? And so it does feel credible now. But if we just did that without any incubation, people be like, what's going on with Satisfy? Aren't they a brand from Paris? What are they doing with all this Western cowboy stuff? And so I think it's really about placing the chips correctly and making sure that's also reflected throughout the whole ecosystem. We did our athlete camp last season in a ranch. We had a dedicated issue of Possessed around a ranch. And so it's really making sure that it feels cohesive across the world as well.
Yeah, audio is helpful for interviewing on a podcast. Are there ones that don't work? And how do you approach that? Because kind of what I was thinking about as you were going through all that is, it's the Henry Ford. If I asked people what they wanted, it would have been a faster horse. Like, I don't think people are asking specifically for like the high country collaboration. But like you said, when it drops, people are like, yeah, this makes sense. And it builds the brand and it builds the relevance and the credibility. But even the people that are the most in tune with culture, can't get it right all the time. So are there ones that haven't worked, and how have you approached that?
Yeah, really good question. We don't get everything right, but we're stubborn and we insist again, right? And I think I'll give you a really good example. We have a product on the website, which is our modular thermal vest. Um, Crazy out there kind of running innovation. It's a crop down jacket vest with four different thermal placements that you can remove depending on how hot or cold it is outside, and that you can stow. So, you can run when it's minus 10 degrees out, or you can run when it's 5 degrees when you remove all of the down jacket kind of fill, right? When we first launched that product, didn't work. Absolutely. We were like, what did we do wrong? Do people not get it? And this season, it's one of our top performing products, right? And so I think it's understanding, going back to what you said, right? If you ask people what they want, they'll ask for a faster horse, but people don't really know what they want, right? People just need to see something repetitively and then they get it, right? And so it's really funny where first season didn't work at all. Second season kind of worked, kept it in the line. Third season sold out. And so it's interesting how the human brain works, because I think when they see it through repetition, I think Bree says it all the time. He says it to us as a team where one, you're strange, three, you're a crowd, right? And it does take that crowd mentality a little bit. And it sometimes it's difficult to be the first, right? Where if you insist, people see that you believe in it. And then obviously it takes a little bit of time for people to be like, oh, should I be paying 450 euros for this down vest? And then they try it and it works. And so it really is having that patience as well, going back to the C word, consistency also, and being able to really stick to what you believe and say, hey, we believe in it. Let's keep pushing it. But also knowing when to pull the plug as well.
What is it that you think most brands get wrong about building and maintaining relevance?
I think obviously scale plays a huge part in this, but I think it's I think misunderstanding of who the kind of North Star guest is, right? And I think that's a big challenge where obviously in bigger companies, you can't really just design for that. But I would say for companies that are doing 500 million, you can still have that North Star guest and really design for them, and then understand how does that cascade down. Because I think there's a misunderstanding of how quickly people want to be picked up, right? And I think that's the mistake where if you hop on the trend, people will look at you as a trend and then drop you off. I think the biggest mistake is not knowing who the North Star is. And I'll borrow this from Brees, and it would be rude for me to take credit for this, but so I'll give credit to him where credit is due, and saying Brees always tells us it's a mistake to think that this is our moment. And you should never think that this is your moment, because then what is it going to be in 10 years time? It's never your moment. You should just continue to build and build and build and keep pushing. Because if you're like, all right, guys, this is it. People are starting to wear our shoes. We got to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Then you've lost the plot, right? Because it's like, no, this is just the piece in what we're trying to build. And so thinking that this is your moment, or saying that there's momentum, really lets your guard down, and then that's when the mistakes start to come. And so I think those are the two things where, you know, people get too excited and they're like, okay, we've done it, and rest on the laurels. I think, and I think, you see big brands see it all the time, like especially big footwear brands where they'll have a best-selling style, and then competitive brand, right? There are only three or four, right? And so it's cyclical, right? Brand A will have a best-selling shoe, and then it'll go to a low-profile shoe, and then brand B will be like, "Ha, we have this." And then what happens when brand A and brand B can't figure it out, right? And the world doesn't want the low profile or the hype sneaker. What do we do, right? And so it's because, they were like, okay, we got it. It's like, no, we got to keep going. We got to keep going. How do we kind of keep thinking what the next thing is, right? And so that's why, what we always say is like, great, amazing, keep going, right? Across every single team. And knowing that, we want Satisfy to be as exciting as it is in 10 years time, in 15 years time. And we're building it in that way. And so, it's also going back to another thing that Bree says is knowing when to say no, right? I think that's a big lesson for it's tempting to say yes, right? It's hard to say no, but the best thing you can do as a brand is say no, because going back to this is our moment, it's like, no, if you really believe that your brand is built for the long haul, you can do it next year, right? You know what I mean? And I think it's having that focus, having that discipline, and saying 5 key moments. This is what they are. Super tempting. Let's book it in for next year.
This actually tees up a question I was going to ask right at the end, but I'll ask it now, just kind of about the next level. How do you guys think about the next stage? It sounds like from what you're saying, it's kind of not a step by step. It's more of a continuous improvement and evolution. But what does Satisfy look like at the next level? And how do you think about how marketing needs to evolve to support that?
Yeah. So for us, the next big thing is really about beefing up our physical presence. And so this year we'll open our first retail store in Paris. So we're very excited about that. And then we'll continue that rollout, hopefully in North America, somewhere in Asia Pacific, across early 27 and late 27. So it's really about, as we touched upon, building that physical presence. I think we've done a great job digitally, but what we're hearing from our guests is they want to have a closer contact with us, a closer relationship. And so for us, it's about how we build almost these smaller hubs across some of the cities where we're strongest, and really starting to build that closer connection. But then also on the other end, right? I think, what's super unique about Satisfy, at least in my, opinion, is that compared to some of the other peers that we have in our space, I feel like we're one of the most global brands. And so people want to see Satisfy, and Indonesia is one of our biggest markets, right? And so when will we open a store in Indonesia, right? When will we open a store in South Africa? And I think that's quite unique for a brand like us, because a lot of our peers have focused hotspots, right? We have, you know, a brand, Bandit in New York, for example, or, Tracksmith in Boston. But I think what's unique is that, you can see a Satisfy everywhere. And I think that's super powerful. And our challenge is, how do we meet these guests where they are? And our answer to that is going to be, one, physical retail, and two, more LSDs.
Love it. So we didn't get to everything. Not a surprise. I think the only thing I want to make sure I ask you before we go on to the lightning round questions to wrap it up is just around price. You talked about it briefly earlier, but want to give another couple minutes because it's clearly very intentional and part of your strategy. You command a more premium price point within the category. How do you think about it, and how do you make it work for you, for people listening that might be struggling with their price point within the category?
Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to, like, I'm always listening, I'm always aware. Really great interview. I encourage every single person listening to this podcast to listen to it. It's I believe, the CEO of Hermes that talks about the difference between costly and expensive. And it's such a great nuance, but so, so true. I believe that brands like Hermes, Satisfy, we can name other brands, are costly and not expensive. And I think they're when you take the time to really unpack what's behind a Satisfy product or an Hermes product, you really understand, okay, that's the fair price to pay. If I take a look at, our down jacket, or our three-layer jacket that we just developed, this has been developed with our fabric supplier for the past year and a half. It's a complete unique construction that you've never seen before. And so there is time, development, and actually the actual material cost that you need to pay in for that, right? And I think the misconception too is like, we're building our product in some of the best factories around the world, right? You know what I mean? Like, and so we're using the same level of tech that, some of the biggest brands of the world are. It's just that, we're adding another layer to the details that you're seeing, right? And so, if I look at our shorts, which is one of our best-selling categories, we work with a fabric that, used to be done in a silk factory, right? And so it's taking that silk, making expertise, and applying that into a technical space. And so it's about us finding these unique, almost material solutions, and then applying them into our space. And, all of that has a cost. And so it's really about how we educate our guests and saying, hey, for a product of this quality, this is the price to pay. But we understand that the product might not be for everyone, because not everyone wants to have that relationship with that product, right? People might not see value in paying for a higher price because they feel like their relationship, for example, to running isn't that dedicated yet. And that's perfectly fine. We want to speak to the guest that really understands craftsmanship quality, and also wants to be able to feel lightweight. You know what I mean? Like, the new Rainfly that we developed, it's an insane waterproofing ratio, one of the lightest in the market. And so that's for the athlete that wants to be able to run far, fast, especially in a trail race where you need to have that on you as mandatory kit, but have the peace of mind to say, if it does rain, I'm fully covered. And if it doesn't, I don't have to worry about carrying something insanely heavy in my backpack, right? Or in my trail vest, because it's incredibly light. So we're designing for the pinnacle customer, or that pinnacle guest, that pinnacle runner, and then taking that down and having, an approachable short that's at 150 euros, which is designed for someone that's just getting into running or is using it for training as well.
Love it. Yeah, I'm definitely going to be thinking about that, even relative to our own business, because it's kind of, we're also a premium price point for a boutique.
100%.
And I think you get what you pay for. I think that's always true. But the idea of education, and then almost kind of, not being kind about it, but being unapologetic almost, of like, look, here's everything that goes into it. Here's why it costs this much. If that's not for you, that's totally fine. There's definitely something there. I think that's interesting.
100%.
All right, Daniel, before I let you go, quick round, of lightning questions.
Let's go.
If your brand were a pizza, what type of pizza would it be?
It would be a vegan gorgonzola kind of veggie pizza.
What's the
Because
best?
oh, yeah,
All right.
sorry.
Yeah, no, you can
go.
explain it.
No, yeah, just because, healthy, but with like punch in the face from the gorgonzola. I think it's good.
Healthy, but punch in the face. Nice.
Yeah.
What's the best marketing campaign you've seen recently?
Oh, I thought you were going to say what we did. The best marketing campaign that I've seen recently, the ChatGPT merch drop.
I haven't seen that actually. I got to look that up.
Really good merch.
What's the biggest pet peeve? What is your biggest pet peeve in marketing?
When people do a campaign so they can post it on LinkedIn so other people can comment and be like, great job.
What advice would you give to your younger self?
You did it.
What's the biggest missed opportunity in marketing right now?
Listening to your guests.
Yep. It all comes back to that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Daniel, I think that's a great place to leave it. Good luck at Paris Fashion Week and with everything you guys
Thank
are
you
doing.
so
We are
much.
big fans, as you know, and hope
Thank
our
you.
paths continue to cross.
Thank you so much, Eric.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Scratch is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with me, email me at eric@wearerival.com or find me on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.